Some parents inherently know they have more than a picky eater on their hands, that the eating behaviors they see are more aligned with repulsion than disinterest, more similar to disgust than distraction, more physical than developmental. Hey there, everyone. My name's Jill Castle. I'm the host of the Nourished Child podcast, and this is episode number 128. Today, we're talking about Supertasters, what they are, why some kids are Supertasters and some are not, and what that means for feeding them.
Welcome to the Nourished Child podcast, a show about childhood nutrition, feeding kids, and dealing with the ups and downs of growing a healthy child. Here's your host, registered dietitian and childhood nutrition expert, Jill Castle.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. I'm in the middle of January. This is 2021, and the new year has gotten off with a big bang. I'm excited. Today is a big podcasting day for me. In fact, I think I'm going to take a shot of myself and share it on social media. I am recording a solo show, the one you're hearing right now. I am interviewing Sharon Donovan for one of the future episodes here in the next month or so. And she's coming on the show to talk about the new dietary guidelines for the birth through 24-month-old. And then I am on a podcast show talking about my new book, The Smart Mom's Guide to Healthy Snacking. So it's a big podcasting day, which is fun. I love to be able to batch everything together, and it often doesn't work out that way where I can coordinate everything on the same day, but today it is. So I wish you could see me. I have my nice shirt on and makeup on and my funky patterned black leggings on the bottom, which nobody will be able to see but me and my family. But anyways, just a quick update before we get into the topic. The Smart Mom's Guide to Healthy Snacking is out. It's in print, so you can get a hard copy of it. And it is also in digital. You can get it in pretty much any format that you like to read digital books on. So like your Nook or Kindle or Paperwhite. So any sort of iteration of an ebook reader, you can get this book on now. So, what do we cover in the book? I cover, it's soup to nuts, really. It's for parents of tots all the way up through teenagers. If you're planning, interested in planning nutritious, interesting, creative snacks to make sure also that you're teaching healthy snacking habits. I've got it pretty much covered in the book. The book is really to help you raise a smart snacker, and you're going to do so through the acronym Snack Smart. And so it's not just about the food, of course, you know me. I have to talk about feeding and I have to talk about development, and that all gets weaved in there, as well as mindful eating and monitoring your child's eating without being too oppressive and, all the feeding style stuff. So I've pulled it all together in one book to help you be certainly more knowledgeable about snacking, but to make you successful at raising a healthy snacker. So if you're not sure what a smart snacker is, you can head to episode number 124, where I talked about what it means to snack smart and teach kids to be smart snackers. I also did a thing, and if you're on my newsletter, you're going to learn about that thing in February, but I will let you know what it is right now. I started to rebuild my YouTube channel. So over the years, I've put up little 1-minute videos that I created on my website and purposefully averted the camera from me. And this year, I decided that maybe I could warm up to the idea of being on camera. So I am getting front and center and talking about childhood nutrition and feeding kids. No big surprise there. But I would love for you to check it out and actually help me grow the channel. You can head over to youtube.com, search for Jill Castle, search for The Nourished Child. My channel will pop up. You can watch a few of my recent videos. And on the channel, you can hit the subscribe button. I am actually recording one video per week, and I'd love to hear what you want to hear about as well. But I don't have a ton of videos up there yet. And I certainly don't have very many subscribers to my channel. So I would love for you to go over there and subscribe so I can build that up a little bit. Anyways, okay. So that's pretty much it for me right now. I have a couple of upcoming episodes I think you'll be excited about. The one with Sharon Donovan talking about the new dietary guidelines that include the category of birth through 24 months. She was actually on the planning committee, and she'll be able to come on and talk to us about some of the background and the whole process of planning dietary guidelines. So I'm excited to talk with her about that. And I also recently had a conversation with Dr. Perry Klass, who just recently came out with a book called It's a Good Time to Be Born. She is a world famous pediatrician and writer for the New York Times. We had a very interesting conversation about her book and just the state of child health and how over the years, our children's health has improved on so many levels. So it was a delight to talk to her, and I'm excited to share that episode with you. Kids change a lot. Their nutrition needs, eating habits, and food preferences do too. So much so, it can be hard to keep up. The Nourished Child, a website designed for parents who want more nutrition education, helps parents like you get crystal clear on raising good eaters. We've cracked the code on nourishing the whole child, whether you're raising a baby, a teen, or a child with health concerns. Our nutrition school and parent education programs help you get the inside scoop on food and nutrients, positive food parenting, and building self-motivated, autonomous kids who are good eaters. Visit thenourishedchild.com today. So let's get into the topic of Supertasters. So if you have a picky eater on your hand, you know we talk about picky eating all the time. I talk about it on the blog, but I haven't really dug into the whole aspect of taste buds and how taste buds are so different in children than they are in adults. And this whole idea of a super taster, or somebody who tastes flavors more intensively than the normal flavor experience, is really what we're talking about today. And I want to share this with you because I think it does give you some insight and some interesting information to take into consideration if you are dealing with picky eating. So let's start with the taste buds in kids. Children have more taste buds on the tongue than we do as adults. And this in and of itself makes their taste sensitivity, especially to sweet, salty, and bitter flavors, well, more intense. Some kids and adults have more what they call fungiform papillae, or the taste buds that are located in the front and the middle of the tongue than other people do. So there's a larger population of these fungiform papillae on the tongue for some children. Essentially, this density of more taste buds in these areas means that there are more flavor sensors. So what's interesting is that these taste buds can be more sensitized to different flavors depending on what kind of taster you are. So for example, you can be a bitter taster or a salt taster or a sugar taster. So think about it. I mean, have you ever met someone who prefers sweet foods or sweet flavors over salty flavors? I mean, my husband and daughter are a great example of this. They prefer salty foods. They could totally skip out on the sweets and the desserts. They don't really even care about those flavors. It's not that they dislike them, but they don't have a strong preference for them, and they are not drawn to those foods, but they are drawn to salty foods. Myself and my other daughter, we love sweets, and I like salty foods too, but if I had to pick, I would pick sweet over salt. And actually, to be completely honest, I like to alternate the two, which I know a lot of people do. But just to give you a sense, most of us have a taste for all of the main flavors found in food: salt, sweet, bitter, savory, and umami. So we all have a sense of taste for those different flavors. But again, some of us experience some of these flavors much more intensively. One of the bitter compounds in food is called, and bear with me as I pronounce this word, it's a big one, 6N-propylthiouracil. I think I pronounced that right. It's called PROP for short. So it's a bitter compound found in food, and some people are able to taste this compound very intensively. They actually have an inherited genetic trait that allows them to taste prop. So when you taste prop, it means that the experience of bitter is very intense. And in fact, it can be very off-putting. So you might be wondering, what foods are bitter? Well, vegetables. Vegetables are bitter. They just inherently are a bitter food. And that's why we have to work on teaching kids to learn to like those flavors by exposing them to those flavors over and over again and showcasing them in different forms with different side things like dips and such so that they get used to that flavor and they learn to like it. So what is then a super taster? So if we know that prop is in vegetables, we know that prop is bitter, we know that children have more taste buds than adults, we know that some people experience more intensity of those flavors on their tongue than others. So where does a super taster fit into all of this? Well, it's estimated that 70% of the United States population are prop tasters, remember that bitter compound, and 30% don't taste it. This is according to the Society of Sensory Professionals. Of the 70% who are prop tasters, so we're just talking about the prop tasters, 50% of them are medium tasters and 25% of them are super tasters. So that 25% of the 70% who are prop tasters, 25% of them are super tasters, meaning that flavor of bitter can be extremely off-putting to them. It's interesting to note that girls, according to the research, are more likely to be super tasters than boys are. So you might be wondering, what about the 30% of the population who are non-tasters? They do not taste prop at all. You may not know, for example, if you have a non-taster of prop or not. But if you have a child who happily eats his vegetables or warms up to them over time with exposure, you've probably got a non-taster. If you have a medium taster, remember that 50% of the 70% who can taste prop, you'll want to offer those bitter foods like vegetables repeatedly, as well as using some other positive interventions I'm going to go into later here. That repeated offering really helps children learn to adapt to those flavors and become accustomed to them. So I actually go into the details of how to actually achieve that repeated exposure that I'm talking about using a step-by-step process. And I cover that in my book, Try New Food, How to Help Picky Eaters Taste, Eat, and Like New Foods. And I'll make sure to link to the book in the show notes for this episode. And you can find the show notes over at jillcastle.com/128. 128 for episode number 128. And I should just make a little pause here in the middle of the show to let you know that all of my podcast episodes have historically been on jillcastle.com, but I am in the process of moving the podcast over to thenourishchild.com. Makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? It's about time I've done this. It's a big undertaking, so it will probably take a couple of weeks. And don't worry, if you happen to go to jillcastle.com and you enter episode number 128 and you're looking around, you will be redirected to thenourishchild.com. So you will be able to get to the episode, and that's not going to be a problem. But I'm just letting you know that's what's happening here on the back end of my business. Okay, let's take a little music break. Okay, so is there an upside to being a super taster? Well, some of the research out there suggests that super tasters crave less fatty and sugary foods. So that could be a good thing, right? Another bonus is that a little bit of flavor for these kiddos and adults, frankly, goes a long way. And this can lead to less consumption of foods high in fat and sugar. And some of the research has shown that it may reduce the risk of heart disease. So being a super taster can have an upside. But here's the thing about salt. And I wanted to just throw this in there because I think some of you might be thinking, okay, I do think I have a super taster. So what does that mean? And what can I do? And what does that mean for like real life today, Jill? I'm like feeding my kids. I'm struggling with my super taster. It won't taste any vegetables. What the heck can I do? So I'm going to get into tips for feeding the Supertaster, but I do want to talk just a brief moment about salt. So salt masks bitterness. And if you look at the literature on Supertasters, there is some research that shows that Supertasters have been shown to crave more than usual amounts of salt. So it kind of makes sense. If it masks the bitter flavor, children may learn that actually makes food more tolerable for them. And so they might be shaking the salt shaker a little bit more frequently. And if you also been following sort of the nutrition research and recommendations, you know that there is a movement to lower the sodium intake. So this could be a challenge for a child or an adult who's a Supertaster. So I'm just putting that out there. I thought that was an interesting piece of information as I did the research for this episode. Okay, so let's get into tips for feeding the Supertaster. So the goal here is obviously to feed your child a healthful diet, even in the presence of those super sensitive taste buds. And also to remind you that it can take as many as 10 to 20 individual exposures or even more for your child to find a food acceptable. You can always kick up the flavor or mask bitterness with salt, sweet, and even some healthy fats. That's really where the culinary research is showing if you've got bitter tasting vegetables or other bitter foods, you can mask that bitterness with salt, sweet, and even some healthy fats like olive oil, for example, or avocado. So be creative, be opportunistic. Like if there's an opportunity to introduce something new to your child and get that ball sort of rolling, again, you can refer to my book, Try New Food, but you might have to be a little bit more mindful of the child who is a Supertaster when you're offering new foods to them. But be persistent, keep creativity high and look for opportunities to expose your child and to give them experiences with different bitter flavors. And again, I'm always going to say, don't put too much pressure on your child. That probably won't work. In fact, again, research tells us too much pressure to eat backfires. And so especially in picky eaters. So here are some simple ways to tempt your child's taste buds when serving vegetables. Balance those bitter flavors by introducing something salty, sweet, or sour. So if you're one of the vegetables that I think is quite bitter is broccolini. I like it, but it really does need for me to be cooked with some fat like olive oil, like sauteed in olive oil, and some garlic, and perhaps a little bit of Parmesan cheese, which is salty. And that for me makes it much more appealing. So think about that when you're thinking about vegetables. What could you pair? Could you introduce a little bit of soy sauce, for example? Could you introduce maybe a honey glaze? Or could you pair something really bitter maybe with a sour pickle? You might have to experiment here with your child to see what actually helps him taste or her taste these bitter flavors. The other thing you can do with vegetables in particular is to roast them, and that will bring out their natural sweetness. So the dry heat of an oven actually caramelizes the natural sugars that are found in vegetables, and so it brings out that sweetness. I love to roast vegetables. I typically do it with a 400-degree Fahrenheit oven, and then I just adjust the temperature. So if it's something like broccoli, maybe about 20 minutes. If it's something like a potato, probably more like 30 to 40 minutes, depending on how large I cut the dice of the potatoes, for example. We know that broccoli and cauliflower, they're milder flavors after they've been roasted. And guess what? Frying vegetables does the same thing. So don't be afraid to fry your vegetables occasionally. Don't be afraid to saute them in oil, to roast them. It's okay. What I would say is try to use, the healthy fats when you can, stuff like olive oil or canola oil or sunflower oil, as opposed to animal fats like lard or butter. But even with butter, a tiny little speck of butter added to some olive oil just enhances the flavor overall. So have some fun in the kitchen with it and experiment. The other thing you can do is add like a light cheese sauce. You can add crushed up salted almonds, soy sauce. As I mentioned before, I do a lot of vegetables with olive oil and soy sauce. My kids always loved it that way. You can use a squeeze of lemon. You can use a little glaze of honey or add different spices like garlic, like cumin, basil, oregano. Just be adventurous when it comes to trying different things with your children's vegetables. Remember, adding that salt does mask the bitterness, but bitter is also the opposite of acidic or sour. So adding citrus juice or vinegar or a tangy Greek yogurt or a non-dairy yogurt can help reduce that bitter factor in these foods and these vegetables in particular. You can serve vegetables with low-fat ranch dressing or peanut butter. Again, that's a healthy fat. Those are fatty flavors that can help to mask the bitterness of vegetables that a super taster might be really offended by. And oh, by the way, these tips work for children in general. We're just digging into super tasters and really looking at their taste buds and how we can really effort getting them exposed to more vegetables in their diet. But these tips will work for children of any age, whether they're a super taster or not. So what does fat do? The presence of fat in the mouth dulls the receptivity to bitter taste on the tongue. So studies have shown that actually coconut oil has been particularly effective, but milk fat, so a whole milk yogurt, for example, or full fat cheeses will also do the trick. Butter, again, that full fat kind of coats the tongue a little bit and reduces that bitter flavor. You can also just choose naturally sweet vegetable varieties, things like sweet potatoes, carrots, corn, beets, tomatoes, and peas. They are naturally sweeter vegetables. So if your child is not eating any vegetables whatsoever, I would start with these naturally sweet vegetable varieties. Those would be my first choice to sort of warm your child up to eating these vegetables. Again, if you need more help with vegetables because you have a picky eater or because your picky eater is also a super taster, don't forget to check out my book, Try New Food. Believe me, I know how challenging it can be to introduce vegetables to children and to get them to like them and to eat them. Remember, they need to be exposed to them. I say offer them once or twice a day if you can. That exposure will help them learn to like vegetables over time. So don't get too bummed out if your child doesn't eat that roasted broccoli that you just made. Just keep making food for your whole family and expose your children to them. And eventually your children will warm up to them. And even though I say that and I recognize that some kids won't warm up to broccoli ever, that's okay. Remember, there's so many different vegetables out there to introduce to your children. So don't make it a big hairy ordeal. Don't get too frustrated about it. Just do your job, which is to make nutritious meals and introduce and expose your children to vegetables. Don't put too much pressure on. Make it enjoyable, make it fun, and just experiment with it. And don't forget to ask your child what he thinks or what she thinks would be a good pairing with some of these bitter vegetables. So there you have it, folks. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you do learn something by listening to this show, would you mind heading over to Apple Podcasts and rate and review it? I would so greatly appreciate it. And if you want more help nourishing and feeding your child, head to thenourishedchild.com, where I have lots of guidebooks and classes and workshops to help you learn more and be better at feeding your child. And don't forget to check me out on YouTube. If you're not sure where to get started, get my free download 4 mealtime mistakes you don't want to make. I'll link it up in the show notes over at jillcastle.com/128. Folks, that's it. Thanks for joining me today, and be sure to give that child in your life, super taster or not, a loving squeeze today. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to the Nourished Child Podcast, where the #1 goal is to help you grow a nourished child, inside and out.